Dr. Shaver, we're back at it again. Good to
That
see
countdown always makes me nervous.
What's going to happen?
All my social anxiety gets worked up with your countdown there.
Yeah, I don't know. These weird internet conventions for things. You're supposed to, for the 3 people who tune in for the live stream, you're supposed to have a countdown. So
Gotcha.
I don't make these rules. I'm a diligent rule follower.
You are a rule follower. You love you some rules.
Yeah, I do. So we're back at it today. This is the 6th and final episode of the basics. In retrospect, it feels like a lot of basics, but
do you know why I'm really excited about this one?
Why?
Because after this, you have a different guest on your show.
Yeah, that's true. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end. We are mixing it up. The next couple of weeks, we have guest stars. So are you going to join for that? And
I don't know. I just do what I'm told. I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
I think you should. I mean, you're the gadfly in this one. You're the person who pokes at everybody's great ideas. So that's your unique role on this. I'm just here to tell stories and, talk about the way things used to be back in '06. So
at the turn of the century.
Yeah. back in my day. So this episode we're talking about logging today, and should be
logging gives me some fire in my belly.
I can imagine that it does. Should be a whole interesting thing. So we'll play a little transition and go into it. Okay. The basic logging, which, we've on all these, we started with the CIS controls conceptually. There's only one in the basics, or what CIS calls implementation group 1, which is, it says, ensure that local logging has been enabled on all systems and networking devices. So turn it on. That's the basic. Turn on logging.
Fill up your local hard drive with logs.
Doesn't say which. Doesn't say just. It does say, however, ensure that it's been turned on all system. At least I guess that's a qualifier, on all systems and networking devices. So I think it'd be worth to tease out a little bit here. And turn on logs seems to be a pretty universal kind of recommendation for security. I will say, as the security practitioner, it is truly important. I mean, there are all sorts of things, even people that may not have the sophistication or capabilities to analyze the logs in real time. There's definitely, you can't create logs. There's no time machine. You can't go back and turn on logs or collect logs after the fact. You have to make some decisions and do some work to collect these. And as obvious as that seems, this is a frequent problem in security incidents that that after the fact, people go back and there's a need to analyze what happened. And the logs, more often than not, in those sorts of cases, the logs simply do not exist to reconstruct everything that happened. So, there's some basic need in this space. So Gadfly, Dr. Gadfly, sorry. What do you think about logs?
Well, I think this one grossly oversimplifies it. It makes it sound like logging is this binary thing of like, I can has logs or I can not has logs.
Yeah.
And
switches on or off.
Yeah, right. And we can get into all the different logging levels. I guess to reiterate your point, it's a little bit like, when's the best time to turn on logging? Well, 20 years ago. When's the second best time? Right now.
Yeah.
Local logging doesn't do you a whole lot of good.
Why is that?
Because you're creating data that you really don't have a means to access or analyze. But it's better than not having it, because if you did have an event and you didn't have centralized logging and alerting, you could at least go back and through Herculean efforts try to sort that stuff out. So you have it. So it's good.
Collect them later as opposed to set up the collection now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess my issue with the statement is it's not so much that you should have it on, it's that they say that you should have it on everything.
Right.
And I understand the sentiment and agree with it, but that's not reality.
Yeah.
Correct. I think, maybe taking a little bit more nuanced and like simplistic approach of like, okay, we get that as an end game, but where do I start? And so I talk a lot about like, if you're going to have logging on 10 things, what would those 10 things be? And I'm always trying to get to that answer of like, yeah, I understand complicated's way over here. To put my hand on the right spot or you can't see it.
Yeah.
There's like the academic approach, but I think what we're dealing with in most organizations is not that they don't understand this and where they need to go. They don't understand where to start. And if I only have the money to log on 10 things and I only have the time to turn on logging on 10 things, what would it be? So that's maybe a little bit more.
And that's I find is a real problem, because the traditional log, when people think, oh, I have hit this point in my development of the IT function for my organization that I need to centrally collect logs. Those commercial systems for something as basic as log collection, some of them are exceptionally, for such a basic function, are exceptionally expensive. And we don't call out any vendors, Splunk.
You just did it. You tried to mask it with a cough, but I heard it.
But it can be really expensive. It can back you into a corner where you really are having to pick and choose. And we're maybe paralyzed. Where if I don't know which things to turn on. Maybe I'm supposed to do this and turn on everything, but everything for any reasonable amount of time gets to be really, really big for organizations, and really, really big equates to very, very large, annual, even for moderately sized organizations, 6 and 7 figure numbers just for log collection. Something that doesn't directly make my customers happy necessarily.
So I'm going to say something controversial.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to ask you a question. It's a bit of an existential data question. First of all, centralized logging and alerting, a SIM, it's just a data warehouse with data analytics on top of it. Okay. Yeah. Like with security specific data analytics, it's probably not worth what you're paying.
No, right.
So that's my controversial thing that I'm going to say. And
and this has always been the case. Right? I mean, it's our inability. I'll say it controversially in a different direction. Our inability in corporate IT to analyze data, to deal with data, it had created a market for log analytics. And you go back in the day, Kiwi log collector, or
yeah.
I mean, these are
It's just syslog servers with analytics.
And in terms of like, what is the underlying? It's just a JET database or an Oracle,
An
or
RRD,
SQL,
yeah.
It's some basic database, and you're dropping structured data into it. Back in the day, and modern, the new fancy next generation log collectors and SIM managers. I mean, they're literally built on top of, some flavor of Hadoop or another,
open source big data platform.
Correct. And again, that.
Yeah, but AI, Brian.
Right.
You didn't say that part, right. So you don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly. But it does. And I have seen that this is, I can confirm, is a direction and development that's going on in the very largest, in some of the very largest and most sophisticated organizations have gone beyond next generation SIM and have reached a point where they're saying, I can accomplish many of the same things at significantly more cost effectively and at price points, but I have to be able to do that, to say, well, it's just Hadoop, or it's just some data warehouse. I've got to have the skill set internally to build and manage a data warehouse just for security events or log events, and not a lot.
Well, and then you have this whole problem of, if your SIM is your security data warehouse, like, what if you buy another company and they already have another SIM?
Yeah.
Or you buy 7 companies and they have 7 different SIMs. Like, is your strategy really going to be like, hey, remember that one time we spent all that labor implementing this thing? Let's rip it out and re-implement something that's of no strategic value to our organization.
Right.
Or do you figure out like how to tie all those together? That's just something to think about. But
yeah.
So here's that wasn't my question I was going to ask, though. Right. This is the question I have, and I always get stuck in this. So if I'm a person, I'm a sentient being and I work in technology at an organization, and I'm given a certain budget to implement logging and alerting. First of all, that was probably a victory to get that budget.
Right. But
I know that budget, it's not going to cover 100% of my assets, and it's not going to cover 100% of the data from those 100% of assets. And so I'm in this conundrum of, do I go pay a really high price point? And I'm going to give a little context here. A lot of times SIMs are charged based on a per gig price.
Mm-hmm.
Do I spend the most per gig and get the most sophisticated analytics on a small portion of my data? Or do I spend less money and have less sophisticated analytics on more of my data? What's better?
Ooh, and you're asking that as a question.
That's my question to you. Which one's better? So, and I'll give you an example. Let's say I log.
You're gonna judge me based on how I answer.
I always do. Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I'm going to give you an example, a scenario here. So let's say I can afford 100 gigs, okay, of one solution.
Wow.
And I can afford 4 terabytes of another solution. And they're slightly different in their capabilities. Is it better to use the 100 gigs and have really deep analytics in my edge firewall? Or is it better to have slightly less analytics, but now I can do MITRE ATT&CK framework on all of my devices?
Yeah. Wow. Man alive. Well, this is one.
What do you do?
I don't do this often, but I am gonna answer. But this is one. If you are one of the handful of people streaming today, I would love to see people's sort of their own thoughts. You commit as well. I'm going to commit.
Okay.
Drop it into chat. But give me just a minute to. I don't have an instant gut check answer. So start there and judge. So I do need to talk it out a little bit.
Yeah, do so. Well, I think this is the situation everybody's in.
But it's the real world.
So work it out. Yeah,
it's the real world situation. And I will tell you, well, what I'll admit to is in my career, um, being the traditional IT or cybersecurity guy, I have done, and I see most people, the approach they take is they start with, well, there's this law. I don't have the skills to build something like this myself. So I'm going to
Right.
buy
That's
the
fair.
expensive system. And that
Mhm.
by default, that ends up saying Splunk that, at the 15 or $20 per gig, that I'm going to have to pick and choose. And you end up with scenarios where, well, I need my internet firewalls. So I put
Mhm.
those into the bucket. And then there's some really, really, probably domain controllers. That's all my login activity, or, or if not all the major domain controllers that people log in against. So I think
It's less data with deeper analytics.
it's less data with maybe deeper or some analytics capabilities.
So
But
you want a really clear picture about a small portion of your environment.
I I don't know that that's the answer I want,
Uh-huh.
and it
That's where you would
feels
start, though.
I feel uncomfortable saying it out loud that way, because I'd rather have, as I get more into the way cyber works, I'd rather have more data and build my capacity to do things with that. Because what I've seen is that we've gotten off of traditional security, where put a firewall and antivirus in place,
Mm-hmm.
and that analytics and correlation of data, like the indication of compromise 10 or 15 years ago was your antivirus triggered and found, yep, this
Mm-hmm.
is,
Yeah.
XYZ malware.
Right.
And what I've seen more recently is that indicator of compromise looks like, on this machine in this period of time, a PowerShell script ran, a file inside of the systems folder changed, and the machine started communicating with an IP address that's unusual and might even
Mm-hmm.
be, listed on that. And actually, any one of those three things may not trigger a drop everything and
Mm-hmm.
go fix
But
it all.
together,
But
yeah,
when you put them together, you say, this is really, really
this is a
bad,
thing. Yeah.
and we need to drop everything and go at least investigate that, or maybe take the machine offline immediately. And without comprehensive logging, you have absolutely no
Okay, I'm
prayer.
gonna ask you another question then. I'm taking you through cybersecurity therapy today.
Feels
So I'm
good.
gonna I'm gonna ask you a question about it that I think might help clarify your answer. So when it comes down to the I'm gonna say the answer to cybersecurity, not that we'll ever solve it, right? There's always going to
Right.
be challenge. But do you believe the answer, right, as we get better at protecting our assets, is that a big data or a small data answer?
Oh, it's a big data answer.
Okay. So as we get better, it's going to be on the back of big data analytics.
Correct. It's going to be like we do it with it. And again, the big sophisticated organizations are abandoning pools of data
Hmm.
stuck inside of a SIM, and they are building, data lakes or big data warehouses of their security information, and everything goes in there for analysis. All of the feeds of indicators of compromise, all of the logs, all of the, enrichment of what's the user data in my organization, and what do those people have access to. You pull that all together, and you can write the queries to say, what is unusual
Well,
in my environment.
but if the answer to security, then better security is big data, then one of the fundamental premises of big data is that we're able to create high confidence answers from large amounts of low quality data.
Yeah, I love it. And the low quality is interesting. But
Hmm.
can you tell me more about that? Because I don't know. Again, most IT people aren't big data people, or even maybe data people. So what does that mean? The high quality answers from low quality data. You know, explain that a little bit more.
Well, I'll give you an example, a recent experience that I had with an organization that got really hung up in the small data approach to a big data problem. And it was, um, and this was more about physical assets than digital, but I think the analogy still applies. And they kept getting hung up on the when we look at character error rate inside of the big data set, that sometimes the asset numbers were converted incorrectly and it was putting a zero or putting an O instead of a zero. And they just got really, really hung up on that because like as humans, like we think in terms of small data and like I can read it and I hyper focus on these
Yeah.
things. And we had to go through this process of showing them how big data solutions just don't care
Yeah.
because we're not looking for like this discrete match to say like,
Yeah.
oh, that O is a zero, so this doesn't work. Our answers come back with a confidence level to say like, this is a 99.98% match. Is that what you meant? And if you think of like a good example of that is like a Google search, that's a big data answer to, a question that you're asking. And you remember like old search engines, it was like no match.
Literal
It was
answers.
literal matches. Like it was case sensitive. It
Yeah.
was, if you spelled it wrong, there was like no error correction inside of it.
Right.
And I mean, look how effective our search engines are today.
Yeah.
And really that's what, if you look at something like Google Chronicle, and I have opinions about that too that are irrelevant here, but one of the things that they've done is be able to basically bring Google search function to security telemetry data. So
Yeah.
you can put in ill-formed queries and get back meaningful data.
Well, and I will add the experience piece to say why this is crucially important is that the most difficult part of SIM or log collection, log aggregation project that I've seen in IT, the most difficult problem is getting money to do it in the first place. And the second most difficult problem is, especially the traditional solutions require absolutely pristine data. It's a small data approach, and the data coming in absolutely must be absolutely pristine. And
Yes, in order
so
to work.
the biggest part, if you think about 2,000 hours to implement a SIM, I'm making that number up, but if that project implementation was 2,000 hours, what you would see is that at least half, if not more, of that time would be spent in just fixing the data coming in and getting it all lined up and normalized in the format that your small data tool, that the SIM tools want it to be in. And that is,
And that's a really good point.
yeah.
Like what I would say is just because you're working with lots of data doesn't mean you're working on big data.
Yeah.
Big data is an approach to low quality data that we use to create high confidence answers. What you're talking about is just lots of small data that's very structured and very
Right.
discreetly managed, which becomes a human capital problem. Like, can you throw enough bodies at it to solve it? And
Yeah.
there's some interesting things. It's called the Levenstein distance protocol. This you weren't prepared for me to drop math
No,
on you, were you?
I wasn't prepared for you to drop that. You're making that up, but go ahead.
And it's a really interesting tool that we use. And if you're a Python person, you can go fiddle with it in a Python module called fuzzy match. And basically what it does is it takes two strings of text and it tokenizes them. And then it measures how many steps, how many character changes would I have to make to get from one to the other. And so it's what you're able to do like when you do a search for something and it's like you search for a king bed city view room, but it's really, some longer explanation and that's like some subtext words in it. It's going to come back and be like, these are the same thing for your purposes, right?
Yeah.
And it's that kind of math that we use with, statistical analysis and machine learning to go take that low quality data and close the gap between, in big data, we try to get to 70% accurate. If I can have 100% of the data that's 70% accurate, I'd rather have that than 10% of the data that's 100% accurate.
Yeah.
And then we try to close that gap of accuracy to confidence with using machine learning. And I think that's the gap that we try to close here with
I love
a
it.
big data approach.
Here's my gadfly question. How do we turn that into a basic? Like if I'm buying what you're, I'm buying into your line of thought, Dr. Shaver, how do I go do that?
Okay. Here's my perspective. If a bunch of people are going to hate me when I say this. First of all, it's not a thing you're probably going to build on your own. Let's accept that.
Yeah.
But I would argue that if you're working with a SIM vendor, we'll call it a SIM, your security data analytics vendor, if they are effectively using machine learning to solve your problem, their solution should be cheaper, not more expensive. And we use this whole AI ML thing as it's next gen. It should cost twice as much because we have ML in there. And when we're using it effectively, it means I can use big, cheap storage to have high performance queries and take all the labor out of logging. And you just sprinkle that glitter everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we go about it is you have to work to find solutions that use machine learning effectively and at a lower price point. I think people are getting honestly sucker punched with, hey, the more expensive product is going to give us better results. And I don't think that's true.
Well, and again, we tend not to talk about vendors, but I will now jump over on your side and echo that and say, if you think about sort of big names in the space that are, trying to make bank on log collection and SIM sorts of solutions, then you're talking about a $10 to $20 per gig kind of price point for that. If you think about, and we've seen this, any number of cloud vendors that are, I've seen this with large cloud providers are coming out with solutions and the
that
pricing,
are really good.
Yeah, that are really very good, and the pricing's more like
$2, $2.50,
$2, sort of maybe 1/10 the cost, or a fifth the cost of what you would pay for large traditional SIM provider. And beyond that, I think when you look at what the cost of that underlying storage is actually,
here's the answer. Don't look, because you're not going to be happy with what you're paying for.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a dollar per gig. It's kind of, well, what's the cost of a bucket of storage in a cloud? It's just absolutely dirt cheap. Yeah. So,
now that we've made a bunch of people upset.
Yeah.
So can I ask the final question?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So if you had to pick 3 asset classes, okay, so not specific devices, but 3 types of devices that you are going to enable logging and alerting on, what would be first, second, and third?
Yeah, I would always start with firewalls, perimeter devices in particular, and that's probably really anything that touches the internet.
That's everything now. Your PC, take it home, touches the internet.
Yeah, but I'm saying more
like web servers.
Yes, but things that are exposing a service to the internet, and so that's probably a second asset. I'd start with there's the firewalls in particular, but the internet connectivity devices that have, that's when I see where people start, if people, even going back 10 or 20 years ago, if you only did centralized logging of one thing, it was your firewalls, because those firewall logs do provide both cybersecurity and troubleshooting, internet connected services. So your web server, your email server, those sorts of things. I'd go beyond that and then say, next I would go to Active Directory. Your authentication is such a key thing to log. Who logged in, where, when, how, when they, use of privileges. A lot of that comes back to the directory. And from Incident
that
response.
was your 3. You don't get any more than
Okay,
that.
well then there we go. There's my 3.
That's it. Okay.
What would you have a different list?
I would. Your list is pretty old school.
Yeah, I know. I'm an old school kind of guy.
I would put a CDN, like an Akamai, Cloudflare, whatever, in front of all my firewalls and internet devices, and I'd pull all my logging out of there. It's simple and pretty cheap and quick, probably faster than enabling logging on everything. I'd do that. I would stand up an identity aware proxy, and I would log that, and then I would log my primary identity provider. Whether it's Okta or something in the cloud or my own Active Directory.
Yeah.
Those would be my 3 things.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the CDN is the modern equivalent of, that's a key point, is the modern equivalent of the firewall. I think then in all those, then your step 4 is kind of like everything else in priority order.
Yeah, well, that's where we get into the maybe.
Yeah.
I think we covered the always here. And
Yeah.
I would suggest, if you're, whether it's my list of things or Brian's list of things or however you think of it, if you're not logging those things right now, you're in a bad place.
Yeah.
We need to work on that. Everything after that's kind of gray area, but this is the minimum that needs to be logged.
Yeah. No, I'm good with you. Well, I think that's a good answer to the basics.
Cool.
So we'll be back next, well, at least one of us, maybe 2 of us though. We'll be back next week, and we'll have a guest joining us from a large software organization. I don't know if he'll share or I'll share.
Hopefully not Splunk, because I think they're going to kill you.
Who? What are you talking about? But we're going to be talking about, we did the SimSock SOAR episode, and I actually got a bunch of questions about XDR. So we're going to, look at you. I think you could have some great questions, but we're going to dig
Are they
into that.
AI-based XDRs?
Oh, always.
That's all I want to talk
with
about
machine
now.
learning and blockchain now, from what I hear. So anyway, Arlie, my good friend Arlie, is going to join us to talk about XDR next week.
People will enjoy this so much more with him.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Later, man.
See you, man.